KVM is a phenomenon. Its main face became a former drug addict. Its characters were all called secondary. The studio was literally dying due to a series of bad decisions. No unsold rights to the most popular characters. Number crap. Its first films shot on credit using all the big names were still nobodies. On this day, superheroes officially died. Or was it this day? Maybe that one. Does it even matter when if it truly died? We all remember the time when any superhero movie came out. It was discussed everywhere. Everyone knew who the anonymous guy in the costume was, and people were excited to see them. But why? How did these colorful movies for those who were once shunned by society for loving this cinema become so dominant that not watching the new superhero film felt like a conspiracy? I don't know. Okay, we live in an era where Marvel has become a dead conveyor belt. Disney is cooking up yet another film with no chance. Fox was completely bought out, and Sony is clinging onto whatever it can. Thanks for admitting it. But here's what I can't get out of my head. Why did KVN receive recognition while Kevin produced the biggest film project? Why did Russia have no chance of success and Sony even less so? How did superheroes die? And why is James Gunn the one to start the new era of comic book films? Now let's talk about those who have already gone professional. I think no one will argue that Kevin Feige is the greatest producer of the 21st century. He was bald, had a funny face in photos, and most importantly, he was a geek. Long before the MCU, he was producing superhero films, those kinds of films. The problem with superhero movies back then was that they were trying to be short-term franchises. They made a film about a popular hero, or a team, with a maybe-it'll-work attitude, and if it succeeded, they'd think about a sequel. But that was it. Back then, nobody went beyond 3 movies, let alone thought about spin-offs. There was no Fast and Furious yet. Oh god, Harry Potter was just starting out. Transformers didn't even exist yet. The only franchises with long lists of films were Star Wars and James Bond, which kept getting rebooted. And maybe Rocky. 2001. A Space Odyssey doesn't count. Nobody was making 2,000 movies back then. Every producer stuck to the same principle: stay in the dirt and don't move. And if you want to do something bigger, you either won't get funding, they'll call you crazy, or they'll fire you. You're fired? Yeah, being an ambitious producer wasn't an option. But Marvel had no choice. They were like Ubisoft, one more year and it was over. So they went all in, took out a $525 million loan, and started making movies. They gathered the most reliable focus group kids. To figure out the most appealing heroes they still had left, they launched the boldest PR campaign possible. A talented actor who had fallen to the level of an ex-con drug addict was going to play himself on the big screen, but with a happy ending. Correct, because absurdities like this as fantasy didn't matter yet. Iron Man had high stakes for obvious reasons, but the others weren't far behind. Captain America became a war thriller. Thor was pure fantasy. Hulk was, well, incredible. In the last video, I talked about how Nolan brought realism to superheroes, and Marvel ran with it. Iron Man, no matter how futuristic he was, perfectly reflected a real hero. His suit looked real. His enemies were terrorists, and he came across as a true badass. Marvel managed to give us a hero who was a jerk, but not 100% an asshole, and that made watching his development interesting. Captain America, on the other hand, didn't try to be realistic because the genre he was in was already the definition of realism. Making a war film was not just a challenge for Marvel, it was a true test. First, because no one had ever done it before. And second, because no one had ever done it before. But the problem with cinema like this is that it tells the story of war from an American perspective. The main hero is called Captain America. This kind of film wasn't going to work for anyone who didn't have an American passport. But the movie was decent even if it wasn't as interesting as Iron Man. It served its purpose of setting up the larger story. The third foreigner was Thor. Because an epic mythical character somehow lacked fantasy and action. Thor without his hammer? What's the point? For the same reason Hulk flopped. The movie tried to be a story about an oppressed man running from the system yearning for freedom. This might have worked today if Hulk were black. But in 2008, to sell a dramatic superhero film, you needed a well-known name. And Marvel had none left. To be honest, these films were about nothing, just like Iron Man. But that's not why people watched them. They watched for the pleasant aftertaste and the scale. For the first time, superhero movies felt like something new for the industry. Before, adaptations of beloved heroes felt like cash grabs. But now, audiences saw that people actually cared. And what made it even better? The movies were all connected. And that's when Marvel's biggest trick kicked in. The first ever large-scale cinematic crossover. And with it, a brand new era of storytelling. But what made it even better? The movies were all connected. You watch Hulk, and you hear about the super soldier serum. You watch Captain America, and you see Tony Stark's father. You watch Iron Man, and they mention Thor. You watch Thor, and there are blue people and weird trees, and you don't even know what's going on. But things got even cooler when superheroes started appearing in other heroes' movies. Yes, Black Widow might be the most useless character, but still. Wow, the appearance of a character outside their own movie became a signature move for Marvel. Spider-Man, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Falcon Vision, Scarlet Witch Topaz. It was an excellent marketing campaign for future films. And most importantly, it worked. When someone tells you a team of heroes is going to fight a horned worm that brought an alien army, and he himself comes from another world where he was exiled, and his name is Steppenwolf, you start thinking, wait, why do I even care? Like, are you just a wolf in general? Or just in spirit? Why Steppenwolf? Are there steps in other worlds too? I don't get it. And the main villain? Okay, now I understand. No, you don't. Who even is this guy? Marvel, on the other hand, did it right. They had a villain just like this, literally the same thing. But they cleverly introduced the upcoming villain in a previous film. That way the audience was already familiar with him before the big battle. And even though Loki was a weak villain in the first Avengers movie, and he really was weak, you still enjoyed watching that bastard because the chemistry between him and the heroes was already there. You knew him as the villain who failed. And most importantly, his story continued. Understand this, there will be no throne, and you have no chance of beating us. Your army will come, people will suffer, but you will gain nothing. The first ever massive crossover was a huge risk. You're spending insane amounts of money just on actors. Writing a good script for such a movie is not just difficult, it's nearly impossible. Because in 2 hours and 17 minutes, you need to give everyone their moment. And someone will inevitably steal the spotlight. No hard feelings, big guy. You had your turn. Each character had their own quirks, their own genres, their own directors. But making them work together? That's another story. And there was only one director. These characters didn't mesh naturally, but they had to become a team.